Okay, we're going to talk about symbolism in ancient Egypt and its meanings and connotations, things that go along with it, connections to other places, and so on. A lot of people, like maybe looking at this collage right now, glancing around, you're going to notice the Ankh up there, of course, but then you'll see it again here and a couple of other symbols around here and things, and you think that that's what we're about to talk about, but nay, everything we're looking at has symbolism to it. Literally, every picture, every single hieroglyphic itself has symbolism built into it. It's and most of it has extreme tenure. Other things are somewhat newer and enveloped in, but we'll talk about some of that as we go too. But when you look at these things, you don't realize that there's a lot of animism going on where you see the animal head on the human body, but then also in like the Sphinx, you'll see it the other way around exactly. And, symbolism that's easy to see. Something like a bird is going to be an air or a sky god, represent the sun going across the sky, things like that. Like we understand a fire chariot situation. So a bird thing is probably a lot easier to correlate with it mentally and so on. But there's a lot of this from even insects like the scarab beetle and baboons and star symbols and things like that. And I'm going to try to do this in one long one, but if it starts to get winded at all, we're going to go for two. And I think we're going to go for two right here before I even start. Here's the Ankh. And it's probably one of the most common symbols that everybody knows of from ancient Egypt. And here we see Horus, and he's taking the guy to the afterworld. Afterworld. This is afterlife. This is Horus, and you see it in his hand clearly. And in doing so, he's pointing the way and leading on. And there was a god before that, and he passes each one, and there are tests that he goes through and stuff. So this is kind of your passing of the pearly gates for them. And then there's a weighing of the heart and things like that. People are probably familiar with this somewhat. Something that's always been weird to me about these depictions that they show is that they show him with a correct left and right hand, but in a lot of these depictions, they'll show a left hand and a left hand, and you'd have to turn your arm around kind of backwards and turn it the other way, like durr, and flip your thumb out to get it to look like that, standing that way. People always notice, they draw them from the side, but yet the eye is shown from the front. The chest is shown from the front, even though the rest of the body is going to the side. It's an odd thing, but we get used to that in our mind real easy. But it would seem like somebody walking along sideways with their legs pointed the other way. Try to do it sometime. Try to get that down like you'll walk like an Egyptian. See if you can really do that, where you're walking forward, but your whole upper torso is faced the other way, but your head is back the other way. And just for fun, while you do it, turn around your arm backwards and stuff and see if you can keep it going. Anyhow, so you see things like this, and one symbology that you don't notice even when you're looking at things like this is perhaps colors that they use and stuff. In the death symbology, they use black. It's like an Osiris refertility type thing that goes with the dark soil they have of the Nile and how it rebirths everything and goes through the seasons. And so it all has that zodiacal connotation that goes with it. And you'll see here Horus is much lighter than him. And a lot of pictures you'll see him to be even lighter than this or the same color and so on. And they always seem to draw them whenever they're in this death scenes or in certain action scenes where they're a man in action, where especially if they're in the Orion pose and they're smiting somebody or something, they'll show them dark in those and stuff like that, warrior poses and all these type of things. And a lot of times whenever they're just contrasting to women, to really contrast it out, and you look at the women and they're extremely pale, usually much more pale than Horus, and you might see them get dark like this. But at times a woman is connotated in action, and then all of a sudden she's drawn darker. And it goes back to that Caucasian edict of keeping a woman pale and things. But it's a strange thing when you see it in art and they go through it. But red ochre, they only had 6 colors, so what do you do? This Ankh, though, let me get to this real quick. A lot of people can realize this is pretty much made out of a rope type situation. One thing to denote is it's a little thicker, always going down here. In a lot of these depictions, it seems to be going thicker as it goes. Little bitty drawings won't necessarily, but even in this, it grows thicker, okay? He's holding on to the ring. They always seem to hold on the ring, okay? So let's remember that. But in looking at this, what this looks like is a piece of rope with a loop on it, and the loop has had a tie go across it, right? Now you could do this with one piece of rope and loop it around and through and back, but how would you get this to have the knots coming out there? If you were to do it out of one piece, it would be a puzzle, so no, it must be two. So let me see if I can give you some depictions, especially if you've been looking at my recent videos, and we'll connect some things. This is also almost exactly identical to the Carthaginian goddess Tanit and her symbology that's there of a sacred feminine and a woman, right? And then you see that same idea that we talked about in the old cave art all the way through and turns into Isis, kind of, that has this ballerina effect with her ballerina arms up in the air. Y'all remember this, right? Where she's hurling her head and she's got her arms up in the air with this loop concept that's there that detaches these symbols together a little bit, right? See if I can give you another one that really connects us to that symbol there, and a sacred feminine I'm trying to go along with this, and this key situation, that it seems to be this key, and they use it for certain ceremonies, the opening of the mouth. It's a sacred thing. Only priests and special guys in the king have this thing. No commoners has this. That's blasphemy. You know, go around wearing things around your neck and stuff. You wouldn't do that. But this thing right here, does it not look like the symbol for a female that we use in today? Yeah, it looks like a female bathroom symbol pretty much. If you made it even wider on the bottom, it would look just like a female bathroom symbol. It have the dress bottom. Well, it's, you know, you can understand that's feminine just by looking at it, right? But you also know, you know, male is a circle with an arrow going up to an angle out of it, right? But yet this, the female, whoopsie, the female, looks like that, pretty much. Circle on top of that. So this circle, this alpha and this omega situation. And what does omega have to do with everything? And how about sacred eggs? I don't know. This is an egg pointing down. It's the shape of an egg, and it's coiled by a rope or a serpent. We talked about all these ropes having to do with hemp and things like that, and how these ropes really meant a lot to people, because that was the only way they got enough strength to be able to pull the stones for the pyramids and stuff. You can't make a strong enough rope in elder time, honestly, without hemp to be able to pull up, even with multiples of them, and the winch ideas that we come up with today, without something at least as strong as hemp. That's what was on all the ancient boats, through the point of the things like the Mayflower and stuff, and most canvas was made out of it and things like that too. In fact, I've been told, but I can't verify this, I don't know how you would, but the canvas that the Mona Lisa and most of your famous paintings that you know of are on hemp, also made canvas. So this Ankh, this sacred female, feminine, is where this kind of has a connotation to. Let's see what he says. It provides the key to the gates of death and what lays beyond. The Ankh was a sign of life that indicates the power to give or take away life, and could not be carried by ordinary Egyptians. Yeah, like we're saying, it's kind of blasphemy to people. It's not something you would see. You would only see it at certain times. It's kept away. You wouldn't go around flashing it and stuff. So when you see people doing that, it's kind of, they don't have any idea about how Egypt runs anything. But the original meaning of the Ankh is still under debate, they say, but I'll give you a moment here and I'll tell you about what I feel. It's been suggested that it was a sandal strap or the magic knot. The hieroglyphic sign of the Ankh means life and symbolizes divine eternal existence. Being the attribute of the gods, the Ankh is handed to the king, and when he held the nose of the dead pharaoh, ensures his everlasting existence. The Egyptians believed that the afterlife was as meaningful as the present one, and the Ankh provided the key to the gates of death and now what lay beyond. The Ankh really, it's funny, even just using linguistics with the name and how it comes out, on is the god of the sky or of heaven, and this is where this guy was going to go. And so you have Ankh, and there comes with that a Sumerian word Anki, which is like Inky but Anki. And they also say this is a sacred feminine of Inky's counterpart in some tales of it. In other ones it's Ninharsag. And anyhow, so this idea, this idea that this Ankh could go with that, but it's the sacred feminine side of most everything, and then it's ropes and so on. And I think we all realize that we do, not just because of like Italian and or Latin languages and linguistics, that we put a female and a masculine on anything. Like Doritos is male, and piñata is a female situation, right? Okay, so in that same concept, though, key a lot of times would be a female thing. So an Anki, this is the female of heaven, the goddess of heaven, and her sacred binding that she has with you. And you can see that same loop, and they're holding on to it in the depictions of Inanna over in Sumeria, where she looks like an owl. You see two of these in her hand. Now, it's not shaped like an egg, it's more just round. But I'll show you later more about that round and that symbol. But again, it's a piece of rope, and it comes around in coils, and it makes a loop. And these are sacred. This is the thing that they have in the Sumerians, and they pass it on to people and things. So this has a lot to do with that. And again, that's that hemp rope that we've been talking about. So as a symbol of imperishable vital force, the Ankh was used on temple walls, on stelae, and friezes of objects, especially near the feet. It is sacred emblem symbolizing regeneration and enduring life. And see if I'll get some more about that later, but we'll just look here simply. You can see Ankhs all over the place that are in here, right? You also see this twisted rope with a little loop around it, another sacred symbol. And here we are looking at the Sphinx. Now the Sphinx that's here doesn't have any wings, but the other depictions of them that are up in Greece and across North Africa and up in Anatolia and places that they have found them all have that winged type appearance on them. So it's just slight variation. But again, this is also a reverse concept of animal body, human head versus the common thing that we usually see, where it's a human with a bird head or a human with a alligator head or so on. And so when we're looking at these loops up here, one thing to denote is that whenever you see all this writing here, this is writing, and whenever you see this, it's known as a cartouche. And cartouches have kings' names and titles and things into them, and they'll sometimes have quite a few of them that goes along with a certain person in this tomb inscription that they have going on. But what I want you to show you is that what this is this is that loop. Like this is even smaller of a loop, and that's a longer loop because they got to fit the words in there. But let's say if we only had a small cartouche, we would be able to make that as being just a loop with a rope bound at the bottom, and you can see the binding on each one of these where it coils at the bottom. So these sacred ropes. It's just like the Inanna one, right? Just kind of like the Ankh. God, it keeps flipping on me slightly. At least I'm catching it. But in doing so, that's just a straight loop. And the reason it's extended is to get the entire name out. And in fact, they figure it out beforehand. The longest name is crammed in, and then the one that's next closest will have the same size. And each of these would have been that size if they needed it to have anything higher. And again, they cram the walls here to have open spaces. Anything like this or anything larger is almost sacrilegious. At one point, it comes into the Egyptians. It's not that way for a while, but after a while, there's this whole taboo against it. You see these little hands right here? They're kind of like the hands I was talking about before, how they're reaching down. This is the hand of the SunGod reaching at you. So the symbology of that and the SunGod worship, and the Sphinx is really a SunGod worshiper. And like they talk about when the sun comes up, is whenever it's a sun, you know, and so which constellation the sun was in, and they try to take it back to elder times. And I still think it rained a whole lot since they think that it did. Like sometimes it cuts off. Well, because it's so dry there, it flash floods real bad, and that place has gotten just totally flooded out. Whenever it does, it'll run down into that pit. If it's doing so with a lot of gritty water, it can saw its way into that a little bit easier. And if this was happening and it kept filling that thing up with sand, as we used to see it totally filled up with, like a drain, you know, and stuff, and every time it did it as a natural drain type thing, you could see it sawing down into that a little easier and a lot sooner. You know, was it made at whenever the date that it was? It's possible, or that was a remaking of it. You look at the shell on the inside of it, of what they've plated over now and tried to remake the good look of it, and what's left of what was there in elder times, and it's you can't go with the none of this crap eroded from the same time, but look at the erosion on this rock. Well, what is it? That's the same rock. Okay, well, I call BS then. You say that they carved around this and made this temple over here out of it, right? Yeah, that's the same rock. Okay, let's go look at the erosion on that. Oh, let's not do that. Why not? Well, because there's not very much on the right, so there must be something else to this. Abada, and we go from there. Yeah, this is going to be a two-parter, guys. I'm just going to let it go here, though, and we'll continue. So yeah, sun god worship and everything has to do with fire and stuff, too, and everything, you know, so it definitely has that aspect here. Statue with the body of a lion, head of a human. The Sphinx represents the form of the sun god. There you go. The Sphinx, that exists in slightly varying forms, is one of the most important symbols in Egypt. It was depicted with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh. And there's a lot of people, and myself included, believing that it started out maybe as perhaps Anubis, and it was a god of the dead. And then it all became a different thing after that, too. But then that would kind of decline the idea that it was built to go exactly at the time that Leo was pointing out, unless they would have made it at the end of Leo, which would have been kind of foolish, like, well, we're leaving Leo, let's make something maybe to pay homage to Leo. Are we going to do that? Well, let me go back here for just a second then. Okay, so all these sphinxes we see around and everything, this is an androgynous type, you know, animalistic being. But in reality here, what we have is a zodiacal concept. And so what is this showing us? Pardon me for a second. Well, if we look at the other people around there, they all have this type of things too. And you see these lamassu that are all over the Sumerians, and cherubim, which we probably know now, and especially if you watched a lot of my videos. Cherubim aren't the little babies floating around, dead babies and stuff that get to do things, the children that had died and all these concepts that come out much later. But they're actually a guardian, and they don't screw around too much. It's the guy with the bladed swords after Eden, and the gardener of the gates and all these type of things. Well, where was that? Well, the gates of Babylon have these guys in them, and they have an effigy, and strangely it has this idea of a lion with bird wings and a man and a bull. And what has that got to do with everything? Well, that's kind of the key points on the Zodiac. And so it correlates to that. And a lot of people have looked at that and looked at the King's List from them and said, well, these people have somehow been keeping up with the stars for, oh man, it's over 200,000 years. And then there's stories from ancient time where the Chaldeans had been keeping up with the stars for over 200,000 years. You wonder if this is actually them saying, well, we have star charts that'll tell you what it was like or what dates. You know, it's almost like if, whenever I was a kid, I had this calendar. It was kind of neat. It had like 11 calendars on it, right? And depending on whatever year you were in, you would just use that calendar, and that calendar was for the whole year, because it only changes that much. That's all it ever changes, what's going on. Well, actually, it takes 400 years. After 400 years, it changes off by a day, really, believe it or not. There's this whole thing with the Gregorian and Roman calendar. Oops. And the neat thing about that Gregorian calendar, though, that they came up with, is that it figures out for leap year differential, and even though we do leap year, it's wrong, right? It's wrong. And it takes like 400 years to cycle out a day, worth of difference, which is pretty neat. And then there's this factor of every 100 years, and every 100 years you have to add a leap year, but that goes overboard too much. So actually every 400 years you skip one of those, and it keeps you lined right back in. And they had figured all this off of ancient Sumerian stuff and their own mathematics and things, and shows you a kind of a neat level of stuff back then. So anyhow, back over the Sphinx, and so now we're going to talk about Lotus and its symbology. And there's a lot of these. You see them on the top of pillars and things, but Lotus has a lot more to do with it. There's actually an intoxicant that's made out of this, and oddly it takes wine, it seems, to really kick it out well, almost like ouzo and some of these other drinks that utilize two forms in a plant matter. That Blue Lotus, and you soak it in wine for a while. Some people say up like 2 weeks, I think it is, something, and then that makes it into a narcotic drink that had oozed out. And I don't know why, but it's described almost like, well, 1 week is not going to do it, and 3 weeks kind of makes it go sour. I don't know. So you have to catch it at the right time, and if you do it too early, you didn't really get anything out of it. So I don't know how it ferments into the plant, maybe with the sugar that's in there. Hell, I don't know. But they're an aromatic, and you see them given to Thoth here. Thoth, again, is holding this Ankh, so you see it all over the place. Here again is these extremely pale women. I mean, any woman that pale nowadays would be just wow, but this is all symbolic. And of course, Thoth is in action here doing a thing. This is a king's staff here that they have, and there's a few different ones. This is not the one that does the king's ages of years that I had in this other video recently about the history of cannabis in Egypt. But yeah, along with this, though, bird-headed people and gods, and he's paying homage to him and giving him, God of knowledge. Seems like he's connected to this. His wife is the goddess of hemp or marijuana in ancient Egypt. So as a symbol of rebirth, the lotus is a fixed part of tomb and coffin decorations, often in combinations with the scarab, which we'll talk about at the end, which has similar symbolic meanings. The lotus flower flourishes on the banks of the Nile. It opens its large petals with the rising of the sun. To the ancient Egyptians, it represented the sun because it banished darkness. So it as a sun or a flower opening signified the day opening. And you know how flowers go to sleep at night and then bloom out back in the morning. Well, it did this, and there being in a Mediterranean place, they lasted all year. So the blue lotus was the sacred flower of Hathor, the cow goddess of magic, fertility, and healing, representing her powers of healing and regeneration. And so this goes along with resurrection and all of the symbology. This symbol also means the creation and rebirth. Nefertim was the god of healing, medicine, and beauty, and strongly associated with the lotus, and often depicted in Egyptian art with a large lotus blossom forming his crown. The lotus was the only flowering plant in Egypt that bloomed non-stop throughout the year. So there you go, held by the gods and goddesses near the nose of royal kings and queens, so the pharaoh as its scent. The flower was believed to be restorative and protective, and so it had many powers to it, and it's an ultra fragrance too. So always these intoxicants go along with this idea of fragrances quite often, incense and things like that too. The Egyptian lotus is considered a symbolic symbol of Upper Egypt, but is also associated with Heliopolis in Lower Egypt, and again that's the sun, Helios, or so Hele and Hel and Helos go with the sun, and that is so in a way this is a type of sunflower, and you see the lilies and you see the fleur-de-lis type thing that's running from Sumerians off into here with this concept. It's all about the same idea of this morning flower, if you will, right? Well, let's get, Egyptian lotus considered a symbol of Egypt, Heliopolis, in Lower Egypt. The lotus was also closely related to funerary ceremonies and the cult of Osiris and the rebirth, probably because of its everlastingness. And in doing so, it's almost like the evergreen of Egypt. for they didn't really have the cedars and things. They had to get all their cedars from up in Lebanon and all these things, and those are evergreen trees. And an evergreen really comes into play whenever you get a little more north and so on. But the Sumerians had the evergreen ceremonies of, Dumuzi, and so it seems like that has a flavor that's the same as this, but in that aspect, if you will. So you'll have to connotate the two together. It's almost a Phoenix rising situation too, and that all goes together with the same concept of resurrection and a sun god who might resurrect at a certain time in the year as he gets lower and lower throughout the year and back up. That's where 360 degrees comes from in the usage that we have for a circle too, as the ancient Sumerians. I'll go into that here in a little bit. The eye, or what's known as the Wadjet, or the Blue Eye of Horus pendant. It's a protective symbology. Is what it has here, and a lot of people can tell you that there are parts of this that mean certain things. It's broken into a 1, a half, a quarter, eighth, 32nd or 16th and a 32nd around this in circumference with the amount that they're using. And whenever you see how Da Vinci used to draw art and all these things, how they draw out lines and its percentages, and your nose should be this far and all these things. When you look at somebody, you think about their nose being a little high or too high of normal, somebody, or too low, or their nose is longer. You're going to put that line, you're going to put all your lines right, and then that a little off. Or you look at somebody with their eyes close together, and you'll put those X's there, and then you'll scoot them in a hair. You'll be like, that's where their eyes are. You have to get everything set right, then you try to do it. If you try to put the wrong shape of face on, that's when drawing faces. I'm not good at drawing faces. I just kind of know what I'm talking about that and art things and stuff. But anyhow, so and it's always inlaid with lapis lazuli. Well, a lot of times the center is totally laid out, and this is that lapis that it looks terrible now, and they're not going to clean it anymore than they do. But if you lick your finger and rub it across this, it turns bright again. And you'll see a few different colors of it, greens, and a lot of this is fallen out over time. And it's not just the eye that's in this thing here, which also has signification to it too. It's like the eye is the window to the soul here, and then off of hearing is your eyebrows, because you can see it whenever you hear sounds. It makes your ears go up and perk and so on. So this is and so it's basically all your senses here in one thing. And this is the butterfly tongue, a lot of people say, with taste, and so each of these aspects. And of course, one eye is a sun, one eye is a moon. Now again, let's see that idea here. And of course, here's the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. And again, so there's a culmination here too of people that whenever they came together a long time ago had a definite deity and a snake worship concept that I've talked about a lot here recently. And then these vulture and bird in the death cult people, that whenever people die, they put them on daises and let the vultures eat them and take them up into heaven. But that changes real quick, redoing Canaanite burials from the area, and that sacred red ochre burial looked like a womb facing to the east where the sun's going to rise again, and in that symbolic fetal position. And in doing so, they had some naturally fermented or dehydrated, desiccated mummies happen. And supposedly early on they moved, due to bad contact, they moved some of the necropolis and stuff. And I think they were lucky whenever Budge and those found Ginger, the original mummy that you find out there with the strawberry blonde hair that he's got, and it shows you the original mummies and stuff, and described as being a pale leucoderm. And everybody goes, well, down there? Yes, you're down there. Look at tourists and stuff. Look at people that are there. And of course, kings get to be shaded all the time. They show you in the ancient times they had all these little lean-to tent things with these screen deals over them and stuff. And kings are always, yeah, of course, even though they draw them with all that coloration, they show them out always riding the chariot running over people. But did the king actually do that? I mean, after a few times of kings dying doing that, I bet a lot of that was really not done by the kings anymore. Kind of a bad idea when you can just send a general, and if everything fails, you're still a king. Somebody figured that one out. Anyhow, guys, so also here he is standing again on that Ankh type symbol if it was plugged into the board here. But if we'll look now, that is exactly that Inanna symbol that she grasps, where she's wearing wings, and an owl type symbol. And now here we see the vulture, right? And it's holding on to it in that same type of way. And you see a lot of this bird's holding on to something sacred, clawing into it, especially whenever there are people that have this symbology that goes with it. And so let's continue. The uraeus also comes important here. Wadjet eyes, though. One of the most important symbols in ancient Egypt is often seen as an amulet in the form of the Wadjet eye. In the pyramid texts, 2 evil eyes are mentioned, and if you look up the evil eye, they still have them to this day. They're like a blue marble, if you will, and or flattened marbles, and they put them on amulets and things and earrings and stuff. And what's the idea there? Well, God's watching over you because he's looking through the Blue Eye of Horus. Some of these ancient tomb inscriptions say, "I knit upon the head of the blue-eyed Horus, the one who acts." So the idea is that he's going to save you. Have you ever watched Beastmaster? This is that falcon god, falconry people here running this falcon god that's overwatching you. And falcons can see the farthest thing, and 300 meters up in the air can pick out a mouse moving, and things like that. So they're the ever watchful eye. It's a pretty good symbol for it, especially when it fits with all the other things that it does. So the pyramid text with those 2 evil eyes, which seal the door catch, and it's believed that the sun and the moon were the eyes of the god Horus, of whom it was written that when he opens his eyes, he fills the universe with light, and when he shuts them, darkness appears. And so he is the day, and then he closes his eye at the night, but also so that's that special one-eyed god that goes with the sun god worship again. But what's the moon? The moon is whenever he has his eyes closed and he sees what's going on. And this is that Santa Claus, and he knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, or if you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. And the concept there is that he has the moon as his other eye, left and right. So it's believed that the sun and moon were the eyes of the god Horus, whom it was written, when he opens his eyes, he fills the universe with light. So let there be light by God just opening his eyes and making it happen. Really not in that myth, though, and before this time, of course, there was other myths. The name Osiris means the place of the eye. So that kind of shows a different thing, too. And, of course, people know that it hooks up to Sirius and all these other concepts that they've put with it. And, of course, as above, so below, but let's not go deep into that. And in 18th dynasty, that's whenever it kind of left off, and the left-hand side of a coffin was decorated with a pair of eyes so the deceased could see his way through heaven, right? And, in fact, there are depictions of this protector or re-protector of the eye. It describes, and what is it? It's hooked up with Horus. No, not Horus, but it's hooked up with Thoth, and the idea is that Thoth is going to repair your eye, that he can repair your limbs. If you're missing anything in life, they'll put a fake one on you in some way, shape, or form, like you're missing a toe. They found it, a couple times and stuff, and so he replaces it in some way. So they probably actually did use, some type of fake eye or do some type of ceremony over it. So at the end of the New Kingdom, the eye was also depicted on mummies in the area of the breast or the feet, meaning the eyes of Horus, which are offered to the deceased. And so he's going to help watch over you whenever you're going through your way into the new world. The protective eye amulets were worn by both the living and the dead. The eye represented a unified Egypt. And, of course, with all that symbology there and both the things on the left and right, that whole symbol there is a unified crest situation. Protective eye amulets said they unified Egypt, but they also showed anger. They show action. There's so much in that. In fact, even the colors in the lines of the beads mean things on this, in the bottom part. So, action, anger, or protection. So it's really a protection amulet in many ways. but then again to act if it's not under protection. So God watch over you. We do something similar to this. We wear a St. Christopher's necklace. There's a lot of concepts like that. The eye was associated with the bark. Your right eye is the evening bark or boat. Your left eye is the morning bark or the morning barge that brings the sun back over. And so there's the symbology they had versus a chariot and so on. So let's just go on. So let's not make this too long. Where are we at? Hitting over 36 minutes. We'll go a little bit more and then I'll stop it because this one's supposed to go about a lucky 12. Crook and Flail. The crook and flail are a symbology that pretty much looks like a shepherd's hook, and that comes into Egypt, by the way, of course, along with sheep and things like that had happened to them. And then the flail, their counterpart there, is really comes from an idea of a fly swatter that they have with the branch that they use. It's like a cedar branch, and they would swat away flies and stuff. But then again, that thing's got a little weight on the end, and it turns from that into somewhat of a weapon and a helpful item. Here we have Tutankhamun and Akhenaten using them. Crook and Flail, the coffin of each one of them, showing the crook and flail. As the symbols of divine authority and kingship, the crook and flail were carried by the Egyptian pharaohs in important state ceremonies like coronations of the pharaohs. From the beginning as emblems of crops and livestock, they belonged to a minor agricultural deity and Jeti, but were later adopted by followers of the god Osiris and became emblems for the moon gods, which are conspicuously named Khans. Anubis and Hippocrates, or Harpocrates, whichever way you want to look at it if you want to go Greek, the ancient Greek god of silence. And just to throw this in there real quick, okay, so all this stuff in the ancient Greek god of silence was Harpocrates, right? Like Socrates, but Harpocrates, right? And you hear about the harpies and how they do the screechies and things, you know, right? So let's think of another thing. So you know the Marx Brothers, and there was the one that always stayed silent, kind of like Penn and Teller. In fact, he kind of looks like that guy too. Harpo, the ancient Greek god of silence. Just going to go ahead and continue on that. The crook, known as the Heka scepter. So a scepter, of course, is a wand of might. And maces were used in the original part of it. And you saw these kind of egg-topped or pear-shaped maces with extra weight on a whop, you know, and the smiting and things in the earliest part of it. And Heka has to do with Horus and stuff, so on. But people have also said, due to the magic and symbology that goes with this, it has a lot to do with Hecate of the Greeks and so on. But anyhow, the crook is originally long staff, curved at the one end and used by herdsmen. The crook was shaped like a shepherd of the peoples and symbolized government, while the flail, head by the pharaoh, symbolized the role as provider of food for the people and keeping pests away. The crook was a scepter and also carried by the gods and high officials. Later, these divine attributes became symbols of divine guidance and purification. And it's called shepherds of the people and the flocks, and this is definitely a biblical thing here, but it's directly from Egyptian concepts. But this crook was brought to them by other people. So then there's that wasp scepter I was talking about before with this stick. It's a little different than the live scepter that we had talked about before with Thoth's wife. And I was told earlier this is Waz, like W-A-H-S, and I said like a wah-wah pedal, and he goes, yeah, just put an S on the end, so it's not a Waz pedal or a was pedal, it's a Waz pedal or a wah-wah pedal, and this is a Waz scepter. Anyhow, you have Horus, and of course you see the animal symbology like crazy here that we're looking at, and I don't know why this is colored so oddly, but the Ankh is all over this. There's symbology everywhere. The crook and flail, and here we have the Ankh with this, you know, jet pillar situation hooked up to this idea. It's got a two-pronged bottom onto it, or a fork, and then on the top of it, it's usually a bent animal type head. A lot of people have said, you know, it's aardvark, it's this, it's that. But it's just a bent, bad effigy. No one's trying to make that perfect, but they say whenever they actually had them quite often they probably were, and just in the drawing they're just going to go because they're not going to go to that detail anyhow. So it's known as a scepter and depicted by many Egyptian gods and goddesses and priests. The long staff was the Wa's scepter and depicted with many Egyptian god and goddesses believed to have magical powers, symbolizing their divine power. So this is like you have in England and stuff, where they wore a certain special robe, which looks leopard spotted, by the way, for reasons, and then they have a sacred crown. Do they go around wearing that thing all the time? No, only at certain times and only symbolizing power. It's kind of like the Ankh situation that we think, maybe everybody's running around with them in their hands, and that's not the way it is at all. It's not something that's even, the common people probably didn't see it much at all, except for being all over the walls, and they knew what it had to do with, but would they have seen the sacred one? Oh no, it wouldn't have even been out to a public situation. It wouldn't have been walked around with. So the symbol is an emblem of authority. It appeared in relics, hieroglyphics, and art associated with the ancient Egyptian religion. It's decorated with a stylized animal head at the top of a long straight staff with a forked end at the bottom. Was symbolized by power and was associated with the god Seth or Anubis, and with the pharaoh. And of course Seth is Seti, and he's like the red-headed god and so on, and hooked up with Seti himself and the Seti 1 and 2, those type of gods. And then you hear about Seth of the Bible, that's at Cain and Abel, and Cain slew Abel and then banished, and then they had another kid named Seth, and this type of idea. And that hooks up to Typhon, by the way. And that just reminds me now, I'm supposed to redo that video that screwed up from right before Christmas about Typhon. People, oh man, it's got to be on that piece of paper that I don't even look at anymore because it got to be too long and I got depressed. Actually, I did a couple of them too, and a couple of them had screwed up, and then I just put it on the list, and then I'm so depressed over doing the whole thing that I usually don't redo them. Something screws up in a video. That's some of the reasons you've seen a few mistakes in some of my videos. I'll do the whole thing, it'll come out with that, and I go, man, I'm not redoing that, oh my god. But anyhow, it's also depicted by being carried by priests in funerary contexts, as the scepter was responsible for the well-being of the deceased and was thus sometimes included in the tomb equipment or in the decoration of the tomb or coffin. And I'm telling you, they're probably misconstruing both of those together as one of the one that has the declamation of the years, that Thoth's wife, who is the goddess of hemp and knowledge and wisdom and all those things, she's the one that marks out the years of a king's reign. And when that ends, that's the stick that we're talking about with that. Crocodiles. That's pretty darn neat. I tell you what, let's go to part 2 and we'll talk about crocodiles and Sobek and ancient Egyptian gods that go along with this. And I'll correlate it to a bunch of things I've said here recently too. And if you just look at that picture over there, I can see that stick we just talked about. There's the Ankh. Here's this. There's an animal-headed person. There's a little pale women over here in the background with the deal going on. What's up with all that? I don't know. Top left-hand corner, and we'll go to part 2. Like, share, and subscribe before you go. And remember to come back and put a comment. Appreciate it. See y'all there. Peace.